Hi, I'm Tiffany Matthews, and I did my project on chapter 18 of Wonderworks by Angus Fletcher. Feed your creativity. It's about the invention of the Anarchy Rhymer and talks about how literature helps us to play, and in turn, how that helps our brains to function and use more of them. So, this discovery actually started with discovering the default mode network. And this picture shows the parts in color, show the parts of your brain that are engaged when you're in the default mode. Those are that scenario is when you are at play, when you're at rest, or when you're reading certain forms of literature. It was initially discovered in PET scans in the 1990s. It was discovered by scientists at the School of Medicine at Washington University in St. Louis. One of those scientists was Dr. Marcus E. Reichel. He's the one who actually named it the default mode network. They found it when they asked the person volunteering for a PET scan to just relax and not think about anything. And they saw that even in the state of not thinking, all of these parts of the brain lit up. It was previously undiscovered. And as time went on, they discovered it's the same network that is engaged in our brain when we're playing. Fletcher writes, mind wandering has been linked with myriad psychological benefits. And so, mind wandering is a big piece of what happens when we're at play. It's where we're using our curiosity and we're open to different potential outcomes and to trying out different ways of thinking and doing. Our minds are naturals at this. If you think about really young kids, they will try anything. And it's a process for them of learning which things are safe and which things aren't, and how to keep going about learning. And they do that through play. Obviously, as we learn, sometimes our neural pathways get stuck in ruts. We know what we can do and what we can't do. And so, therefore, we don't tend to think outside the box as much as adults as we did when we were young kids. However, we can increase our mind's ability to wander and engage these parts of the brain. And the way that we do that is through improv, which is another kind of play. Musical improv, as talked about in Wonderworks, shows interaction between the default mode network and a rule following network. As such, when somebody is playing an instrument, they might start with a basic song that they know really well, and they might improvise by going out of that song and knowing what they're trying to come back to. So if they go out on a certain chord, they know they're going to come back into the song at a different chord, and everything that they play in the middle is where they're improvising. So they're just changing part, not the whole thing. And that still allows them to engage in that play while also doing it within the confines that can sometimes breed creativity. I took a writing class at a community based organization, and they just did different exercises on Monday nights where they were trying to get your brain thinking. And one of the ways that they did that was to do with it was basically writing improv. And so we were given a picture from the magazine and told that that was what we would be writing about. So that's already kind of stretching your brain a little bit to have that creativity. But then throughout the 10 minutes we were spent writing about that picture, every minute the instructor would give us a new word that we had to incorporate into this short story we were trying to write about the picture. And when we all read them out loud at the end, the instructor actually talked about musical improv and how when a musician goes out of their known song, their known rule following, and they experiment, they do often leave themselves a spot to come back in where they know they're working their way back to. And he talked about how we could see that in a lot of the stories that we were sharing, how students who were writing would leave their story a little bit to incorporate this word, but then they would leave themselves a spot to drop back into the same story that they were already telling. Similarly to these creative endeavors, reading literature can also open these same neural networks that allow us more of an opportunity for play. And those are what Fletcher talks about in Wonderworks. And he talks about nursery rhymes and that rhyming pattern and that rhyming scheme, and how that can really help develop our play. And one of the nursery rhymes that he talks about is Hey Diddle Diddle. I'm going to actually show a video on YouTube of Hey Diddle Diddle. And as you watch, if we can think about how that's encouraging mental play and the number of things that it's asking you to assume are possible, I think you'll get a good idea of how this is stretching our mind and opening up different components. You'll notice that there's some verbal confusion in this, and that it is asking you to reimagine the way we know things work. But part of what keeps us on track is the musical pattern, the rhyming of the words. So here's the video.
Oh, what a wonderful sight!
I used to work in a public library system for the city of Scottsdale, actually, and I was a youth library assistant. So I ran story times on a regular basis, and we did all kinds of nursery rhymes with kids. And it's great fun to watch a kid get excited about the nursery rhyme. But I think even better than the kids getting excited was to watch these tired, exhausted parents who've been chasing young kids around when they would get excited and start engaging in the play of the nursery rhyme and understanding that significance. And so it was very interesting to see, and showed some of the benefits of engaging in mental play and engaging these parts of the brain, is that it's opening people up for an opportunity to relax and to enjoy the moment that they're in. And so I think that's really important and significant to consider. And then the narrative structure is also what Fletcher talked about. He talked about how adding structure to the rest of, adding one structural component to the rest of a narrative helps the narrative to remain free and creates some anarchy, but still grounds us and leaves enough stability that allows us to engage in play. And I think that space is really important to consider, because one of my other past professions, I worked in child welfare, and we did a lot of studying on how to help kids. And you will notice that in kids who don't have structure, who are raised in an abusive or neglectful environment, they struggle to play. They're focused on getting their needs met. They're focused on, hoarding food, or demanding attention, or trying to get a certain reaction out of a parent so that they know that they can and they can create their own stability. And the kids who are raised in very stable homes are the ones who want to play and who go off and try new things and experiment and are curious and really deeply engage in that. And so I think that speaks to just the human condition, where if we have more stability, we're actually able to better engage in instability. We're better able to engage in the anarchy and the freeness. And this works in media as well. We have Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Here, Alice is talking to a purple cat who talks back. So, from the throughout this movie or throughout the book, you see Alice engage in different activities that don't make sense. They don't make sense the same way that it doesn't make sense that a dish can run away with a spoon. And the stabilizing force in Lewis Carroll's work, however, is Alice herself. She is a stabilizing character in a world where the rules are always changing. Sometimes she's small, sometimes she's really big, but she is always there saying that it's impossible. She is always there taking the next step. And it is that stability and that ongoing composure that allows us to accept all of the rest of the things that she is doing that don't make sense. On a different regard, A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh uses Christopher Robin's world or the 100-acre wood as the stabilizing component. In that setting, we know we're safe. There is nothing that can go wrong that cannot be unimagined within Christopher Robin's world. That allows Winnie the Pooh to improvise imaginatively, whether it's floating with his balloon up to the honey tree or fighting the heffalumps or hiding from the heffalumps. He is always able to do what he needs to do in order to stay safe. And so when we think about like these different stabilizing factors and how we are able to play outside of them, that's actually leading into what I hope to do for my project, where I would like to create something of a relationship that is the stabilizing factor. And while that can be controversial because many relationships are not stable, we do know that when we do have stable relationships, we're better able to engage in play. So if we read about a stabilizing relationship, then we should also be able to engage in that play. So that's something I will be exploring for my project. When we look beyond Wonderworks and we consider other inventions that feed our creativity, I really wanted to take a look at adult media. Wonderworks really focuses on how these rhymes and this play works in children's literature, and that's great. I love children's literature. Madeline L'Engle has a quote where, paraphrased, she says that when she finds material too difficult for adults, she writes the book for children. And I think that that's a beautiful thing. I think a lot of children's literature is worth going back to and revisiting to feed our creativity. But I also see a movement where some of this opportunity for play is making its way into adult media. And I think that that's important too. And some of the places where I have seen this have been in the 10,000 Doors of January. This is one of my favorite books. And in this book, the main character is January, and she goes on this adventure through doors. And it's not doors in physical buildings, it's doors she finds in the middle of nature. And she steps through them into whole new worlds and realms. And she explores and she is the constant character, much like Alice, who is going through all of these struggles and trying to get back to where she started, but also still finding ways to appreciate the journey and the different steps that she takes. And I think that by taking that one rule of a door leading to somewhere new, but stretching it so it's not just leading you from inside to outside, but from one world to another, creates that space to play and to engage. And there is some language throughout that book as well that is very beautifully written, very poetic. And I think that some of that rhyme and that meter, similar to how Lewis Carroll uses poetry throughout Alice in Wonderland, is also part of the stabilizing factor that brings us back to allowing this possibility. Another piece of media I thought of was The Greatest Showman. In some ways, I feel like circus and seeing the incredible is a huge component to play. And I think that this movie does a very good job. And in many ways, I would say that the relationships between all of the characters, where they all come to believe in their own values and the value of each of them individually and how they share that belief and their collective value, is the stabilizing force that drives that movie. And so, as long as they believe in each other and they can stay together and they can interact, then anything else can go. They can burn down the tent and they can still keep going and finding new ways to play and new ways to engage and new options to take. And so those are two of my favorite forms of adult media that I think are also using a variation of the Anarchy Rhymer and feeding our creativity. And so that leads me into our questions, where one of them is, what media has allowed you to engage in play and feed your creativity as an adult? And so that can be anything. Like, even if you want to share something that you loved as a child, but you've revisited as an adult, that works too. But I would also really love to know if there's any other content made for adults that uses the Anarchy Rhymer. So from both angles there. And then as an alternative, if you were to pick a medium, whether that was music or theater or writing, to engage in improv with, what medium would you choose? And then from there, what would be your stabilizing force? So in that regard, I think I'm really talking about like the creation of the Anarchy Rhymer. Like, how would you create that in your own work of art? So hopefully that leaves us some good things to consider, and we are able to feed our creativity and go out and elaborate and let that grow and create a place where we are not only feeding our creativity by creating it, but others by sharing it. Hope you all have a great afternoon.